When Harry Truman became president after Franklin Roosevelt's sudden death on April 12, 1945, foreign policy was certainly not his strong point. After 10 years in the Senate, he was much more comfortable with domestic policy. But we were surprised to learn there was one issue that he felt very confident about that he could handle himself, and he insisted on doing it from the White House. And that was the situation of the Jews and the future of Palestine. But things did not go smoothly at all. In fact, his daughter Margaret said it was actually the most difficult dilemma of his entire administration. And this is saying something about a president who had to end World War II, put his country back on a peacetime footing, deal with a new Cold War with the Soviet Union, and help reconstruct Europe. 8 days after Truman became president, he was visited by a Zionist delegation headed by Rabbi Stephen Wise. He told them that he supported the Zionist goals, but he was very concerned about the opposition from the State Department. And that opposition was very quick in coming. The State Department informed him that he should leave Palestine and the Jewish situation to them, to experts, and that the creation of a Jewish state would require hundreds of thousands of American troops, much American treasure, and would certainly start World War III. Well, Truman decided instead he would back up and focus on the more achievable goal of getting 100,000 European Jews who would survive the Holocaust and were now languishing in the displaced persons camps of Europe into Palestine. Only he found that the British who held the mandate over Palestine would not allow it. They were going to stick to their 1939 white paper, which severely limited Jewish immigration into Palestine, as well as the sale of land to Jews. Now, this refusal of Truman's request, as you'll see from our book, set off a whole chain of events that eventually dropped the issue of the Jewish refugees and the future of Palestine on the doorstep of the new United Nations. The result was a UN vote on November 29, 1947, to partition Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. Then finally, on May 14, 1948, Harry Truman surprised the world and caused pandemonium at the UN by announcing that the United States recognized the new state of Israel, making it the first country to do so. Right after Truman made his announcement, he picked up his phone and he called his advisor on Jewish affairs, David Niles. He said, "You're the first person I'd call with the news, Dave, because I knew how much this would mean to you." Niles, who also served in the same position under FDR, later claimed that if FDR had lived and Truman had not become president, Israel would not exist. This statement intrigued us. Was it really true? Many in the Jewish community then, as now, believed they had a very good friend in President Roosevelt. Now, of course, nobody knows for sure what FDR would have done had he lived. During the war, he had made conflicting promises to the Jews and the Arabs, promising them both essentially what they wanted to hear. He told the Jews that he could best help them by utilizing America's resources to win the war, and that if they were only patient, they would get justice after the Allied victory. He also told the Arabs, on the other hand, that nothing would be done in Palestine without consulting with them. And as we show, FDR had made so many contradictory statements on where he stood on the issue of a Jewish state in Palestine that at the time of his death, it was not entirely clear, even to those close to him, where he stood and what he would have done. So in light of Niles' judgment, we asked ourselves, why would Truman's decision about the creation of a Jewish state have been different than FDR's? And what actions did he actually take to help bring it about? And how necessary was his actions to Israel's creation anyway? We thought the key to understanding Truman and his role would be to place the story in the context of the very dramatic events that Truman encountered from the time he became president in April of 1945 to his recognition of Israel in May of 1948. And we believe the best way to do this would be through a narrative history, and that's how our book is written. Up until now, the discussion of Truman and Israel has really centered on the question of what motivated him to act as he did. And the way we're going to work this is I'm going to discuss Truman's motivations, and then Ron is going to talk about the heavy opposition that Truman faced. So I'm going to mention several theories. The first explanation is that Truman did it for humanitarian and moral reasons. This is the reason Truman would have given, and in his memoirs, he claimed that his chief motivation was to find a peaceful solution of a world trouble spot based on the desire to see promises kept and human misery relieved. The promises he referred to, of course, would have included the 1917 British Balfour Declaration, which promised the Jews a national home in Palestine, a promise later incorporated into the Palestine Mandate granted to the British by the League of Nations after World War I. Every American president, from Woodrow Wilson on down, had given his approval and expressed sympathy for, as FDR put it, the noble ideal of the restoration of Palestine to the Jewish people as a homeland. The platforms of both the Democratic and Republican parties at their 1944 conventions supported the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Now, as for human misery, Truman would have pointed not only to the Holocaust, but to the terrible conditions of the Jewish survivors. A report done soon after Truman became president by Earl Harrison, a former U.S. Commissioner of Immigration and now Dean of the University of Pennsylvania Law School, concluded that the Jewish DPs were living under conditions similar to those experienced in the Nazi concentration camps, only now we don't kill them. He talked about them wearing hideous pajamas, of having starvation rations, and of generally being in a terrible situation. Truman said reading about the situation in Harrison's report made him sick, and he vowed he was going to do something about it. The second theory is that Truman's motives were purely political. He simply did it for Jewish votes and contributions. This was the explanation put forth almost immediately by the U.S. State Department and the British Foreign Office, and later by some political scientists and revisionist historians. Truman contributed to this impression by complaining to the British and others about the political pressure on him, especially from New York politicians who had a large Jewish constituency. It is true the Jews were a very important constituency in the Democratic Party, and the revelations of the Holocaust and the plight of the Jewish refugees had a very significant impact on them and their relationship to Zionism. Before World War II, Zionism had been mainly a European movement with a very small following in America. The Jewish establishment in America, by and large, thought the idea of a Jewish state unnecessary and possibly even dangerous. It might threaten their status as Americans and make them suspect of having dual loyalties. But the Holocaust, which destroyed 1/3 of world Jewry, meant that they were now the largest, wealthiest, and most influential Jewish community in the world. It was a very grave responsibility. The inability of the Western democracies to save their fellow Jews, to give them a safe haven, and their refusal, even now at the end of the war, to admit significant numbers of the survivors, strengthened the Zionist argument that the Jews would only be safe once they had their own country and could defend themselves.